So I was working on a 3D rendering project just now and had to get up for a minute and noticed my shadow while I was walking. I had a realization about calculating real-time shadows. When you have an object that casts a shadow, can I write on this? Let's see if I can write on this. When you have an object that casts a shadow, the shadow is basically a silhouette of an object. So if you have an object like a person, then a shadow is more or less going to be a silhouette of that object from a specific angle. So if the light is over here, then the shape that you're going to have of this shadow is always going to be something like this because it's from the side. If you had a light from the top, then regardless of how this character moves, the shadow is always going to be some form of this. So my question was, well, realization I guess was that if this is your shadow, then you can assume that on whatever surface that shadow hits, it's just going to be some distortion of that shadow. So if you imagine like having a box around this, you can use this to, like if you were to drag this particular corner out, then it would be distorting that shadow to something like this. So just move that corner outward. So if you know the relationship between the object and the object that's casting the shadow and the object that's receiving the shadow, if you know the difference in rotation and you know the difference in distance, then you can probably calculate what this distortion is going to be. So you have one static image per light. That static image, based on degree and angle, is going to have a certain amount of distortion. And if you wanted, you could probably apply this as a texture overlaying the normal texture of this object just by calculating any 2 points on it, the location of those 2 points. So if I knew that the tip of his foot was here, and I knew that maybe his ankle was here, then if I knew those 2 points, I would know that the shadow is going to go here. And if you're only calculating, like if you're only showing the part of the UV, the texture that's actually colliding with the object, then the shadow that would be cast is just this part. So the things that you know are, per light, you have a image of a shadow that is distorted based on distance and rotation, and calculated the location of and applied as a texture by finding 2 points. So the information that you would need to know is you need to know the relationship between the object and light once to discern this silhouette. You would need to know let's put a light here and a person here. So you would need to know what this relationship is once in order to determine a texture, and you would need to know what the relationship is between this object casting a shadow and the object the shadow is being cast on, in order to determine what the distortion factor is. So the distortion factor you probably only need to calculate once, and this is if you're really trying to save time. And then the only other things that you'd ever need to know on an update is whether there are 2 points on that texture somewhere, or on this edge of the shadow somewhere, and using those 2 points, you can calculate where that shadow should be on the particular object. So if you have a wall and a floor, then you would need to know the silhouette image from the light, once, you would need to know the difference between this object and the character and this object and the character. So you would need one piece of information per object, and then you would need 2 points per object. Where does let's say this is his hand. I know that his head is here because the inside of his hand is there, and I know that if this is his hand, these aren't going to match up, but then I can draw a shadow on both of these. And I would only need to recalculate those 2 points each update in order to find how that shadow has moved. I can see lots of reasons that this wouldn't work, like in certain circumstances, but I think if you're trying to do an incredibly fast shadow that actually uses the shape of an object for reference, then that might work in a convincing way.